Good morning, afternoon, good day, whatever time zone you are in. My name is Beth. My pronouns are she, they. I am hosting this panel for ACE's Disability and Medical Discrimination within AceCon this year. And I am glad to see you all here. Thanks for joining. We're going to talk about how the intersections of disability and asexuality impact our lives. So I'm going to quickly read out the description of the discussion, which we have posted on the website for anybody who has not read it or needs a refresher, and then we're going to do introductions. So, because our society is getting used to ACE in real life, sometimes assumptions are made regarding people who are ACE and their medical needs. In addition, there are many assumptions which may connect asexuality and disability, which is why one of our panels, this one, are on, one of our other panels are on ACE and autism. However, this discussion will look at a broader overview of how our community gets treated regarding disability and medical discrimination. The discrimination is not only systemic or institutional, but often results in our own personal lived experiences. Talking about these situations helps us regain our identities, empowerment, and dismantle the biases for a better life. So we have a group of wonderful people who have volunteered for the panel today, and we're going to get them to introduce themselves one by one. We'll start with Priya.
Hi, my name is Priya. I go by she, her pronouns, and I'm really excited to be in this panel with everyone here today.
Thanks, Priya. Destiny, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Destiny. My pronouns are they, them, or she, her. I'm so glad to be here with all of you today.
And we are glad to have you here too. How about you, Changeling?
Yes, hello, my name is Changeling, or that's my go by, and I have been in the ACE community on and off for over 12 years, and I'm also excited to be on this panel.
And we are excited to have you. So, everyone, just a reminder, we have questions in the SliDo. So if you have any questions you want to ask us, you can just post it below. And then our wonderful helper, Marissa, will connect us with those questions. And we also have Brady doing that as well. Thank you so much to you too. And then we want to thank also the tech support Matt, who is making sure things happen and helping with all the things that are very hard. With that being said, we will go to the first question. So the first question is, what assumptions have been made about you or people you know regarding the connection between asexuality and disability? Would you like to start, Priya?
Sure, absolutely. Assumptions that have been made in regards to the connection of asexuality and disability are really, really common in healthcare in the United States because asexuality does have a very long history of being pathologized, medicalized over here. So, asexuality actually was in the DSM for quite a while until 2013. So, there is definitely this connection to people believing that if you're asexual, there must be something quote unquote wrong with you. Like, sometimes people might think there's a more hormonal issue or some sort of mental health issue. So people will often see asexuality as a sign of a larger issue instead of as an orientation, in my experience.
Definitely. Thank you, Destiny. That's a great description of how it is in your area. And I would say that Canada feels the same way about it. What would you like to share about this, Destiny?
So I am partially blind. I also have low hormones, but I was on hormone replacements and I still didn't feel sexual attraction to anyone. And I know people with visual impairments who are not asexual. In fact, I knew someone in my many years ago who was very, very sexually attracted to people. So it really isn't always the case. So that's those are the two assumptions made about me. Oh, it's because of your blindness. Oh, it's because of your hormones. So that's all I wanted to say with that one.
Thanks for bringing light to the intersection of blindness and asexuality. We really do appreciate that. Changeling, what do you have to share about this question?
So similar to Destiny, I am totally blind. And so a lot of the assumptions, and they're very quiet, generally speaking, but a lot of the assumptions are, that blind people aren't sexually active. So, like, when I go to the doctor's office, if I'm filling out forms, if I'm doing it on the computer, it asks me if I'm sexually active because it's a computer and it just knows that this is another data point going through the system. But if somebody at the office is actually filling it out, that question just gets discreetly skipped. And I'm assuming the answer they put in is no. So there's that assumption. That's the big one.
Yeah, that's really important to take note of. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing that. Unfortunately, the intersections of blindness and asexuality was something that I did not necessarily think about until today. So we all grow, we all learn. Thank you. Okay, so let's go to the next question. What are the differences between how people show bias towards physical disabilities and asexuality versus cognitive disabilities and asexuality? Destiny, are you okay with starting this one?
Absolutely. So, I don't think I have any cognitive disabilities. I thought maybe I have ADD or something, but nothing's been diagnosed. But with physical disabilities, I assumed, they might not be sexually active because they maybe because of discrimination or bias, but they still might want to. And people with cognitive disabilities, from what I hear, are usually thought of as like being like children. So people don't think of them like as being consenting adults who would want sex. So that's kind of the difference that I see is like people with physical disabilities, they will still want and have sex. And I'm like, you hear in disability discourse, I'm not asexual because I'm just disabled, but you don't hear as much of that with the cognitive disability thing. You might, but that's the only differences I could slightly see, and I might be completely off base.
No, what you say is valuable, and even if your knowledge is more in one area than another, we all learn from each other, and that's important too. How do you want to answer this question, Changeling? What are the differences between how people show bias towards either disability?
So I don't have a cognitive disability either, but I will tell you that with physical disability, there is often a perception that there's a cognitive disability that accompanies it, and so what that leads to is some infantilization. So going back to I never get asked that one question at the doctor's office, which is also not something you would ask a child. That's a question for adults. So, and some people just aren't comfortable asking that question, even if it's only to fill out a form. But a lot of times people do assume it. And so between those two things, they're like, well, you can't possibly want to partake in that. That is a rite of passage for a whole person, not someone who's disabled. So that's where we are on that.
I appreciate that, and I also appreciate your perspective, which challenges how discrimination is shown, even in ways that are often not perceived as discrimination, such as the forms or the lack of questioning. Like, it's so subtle, but it's also so prevalent. And that's what we need to remember about how these things impact our lives. Priya, would you like to discuss this?
Sure. So, full disclosure, just to let everyone know, I currently do not have a disability, but I will say that from the attitudes, like the biases that people have towards physical disabilities versus cognitive disabilities, is that, and asexuality, is that between physical and like cognitive disabilities, there's usually more awareness about physical disabilities because it is like usually a more visual thing, so people can usually see it. And then with cognitive disabilities, because it is invisible, there's usually a much higher lack of awareness, and that can lead into, and if cognitive disabilities and asexuality are like linked together, that can often lead to like confusion. Like people can start thinking that they're related somehow or they're linked somehow, that like asexuality and cognitive disabilities are these part of the same condition when they're very separate. One's an orientation, one's a disability.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry about the noise that you heard earlier. The dog I'm dog sitting had a toy. But thank you all for sharing that. These conversations are so valuable and so important. Let's go on to the next question. Has the societal impressions of asexuality or the perceived lack of sexuality impacted your ability to access medical services? So we talked a little bit about this already, but let's just go deeper. Would you like to start the question, Changeling, please?
Sure. So most of the discrimination I get in the medical field comes from my disability. And the reason that happens is because, and I keep coming back to this one question that never gets asked, but I mean, if you really stop and think about it, all the other stuff that comes from, being discriminated against sexually comes from the question, are you sexually active, and what is your preference of sexual partner? Once that information comes out, then you can say the discrimination is based on that. So because that never gets it. But I mean, I've had plenty of things that have happened to me because of my disability that were technically discrimination. Most of where my intersection hits is when I'm interacting with the various asexual communities on the internet. Honestly.
Sorry, did I hear that right? Most of the discrimination you face
Yeah, most of the like the intersection between, for me anyway, between asexuality and disability comes from various ace communities on the internet and their attitudes towards disability and inclusion. So when you say the intersection, it's not necessarily discrimination, although those two words seem to go hand in hand when we talk about these kind of things, because those are the issues that we're looking at. But even if you go into like a Discord server and you're like, hey, can you make sure the photos have alt text on them? And that starts happening. Well, that's intersection between disability and asexuality there. But it's not necessarily discrimination.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, Priya, what would you like to say?
As for like the lack of access to medical services, it has been difficult to get mental health services as an asexual because there is this perception that asexuality is um, linked to any sort of like mental health function. So I have had issues where I have had issues in the past where um, once I opened up about my orientation to a medical professional, it was perceived as something that needed to be fixed or changed in some way, like that the orientation was the issue when I had some just other issues that I wanted to like work through and talk through instead.
Exactly. And I've heard many stories, even specifically about like sexual health, where people who are in our community have voiced their orientation to the medical profession and yet kind of got dismissed for the whole topic of discussion because of that one comment, that one disclosure that they had, which is not good. Destiny, what's your intake on this question?
So most of my medical discrimination usually comes from size and ability, but yeah, they some doctors can be dismissive of asexuality, and even one time they were mentioning like talking about hormones, and they were like, if you didn't want to deal with a period, you could get a hysterectomy, and because I would have to take female hormones to have a period. If not, it could lead to cancers or whatever. But we don't want to do that because you might want to have kids down the road. I'm like, first of all, I'm never gonna have sex, and second of all, I never want to have kids. And when I had to take the hormones to have a period, I hated it. But yeah, but at the same time, like, yeah, I don't know. Just most of it has been about other stuff, like being infantilized because of my disability, um, focused solely on my size. So, like, not as much about my asexuality, although there have been little moments. So, that's it for that.
That is very relevant. I feel that. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate everyone's input. So let's go on to the next question. Has your self-identification of asexuality impacted your ability to receive sexual health services? The reason why I ask this question is because of the nuances between people who are asexual are automatically assumed to not be sexually active, and some people who are asexual are sexually active. So you can like talk about your own personal experience or other people's experience that you've heard of. And if you do want to pass this question, you definitely have the permission, I guess, to do that. Would you like to start this, please, Priya?
Sure. I would have to say that for me, if I'm ever I'm trying to if I'm ever in a doctor's office and there needs to be some medical issue related to that part of life, sexual health, I don't usually disclose my orientation, and I do wish that there was more sex education geared towards asexual people, because regardless of orientation, we all have choices to make, and we all know someone who's impacted by sexual health. So I feel like the biggest impact for me is just like I haven't not feeling comfortable really talking about my orientation in like a medical setting, and wishing that there was just more education about how sexual health is perceived and works by like fellow people in the ACE community. That would be really nice.
Yeah, I agree. And that's a very important thing to note, that because of these lack of resources, we often have to default to supporting ourselves in our own community in these ways. And then that kind of reinforces the lack of education and the lack of resources available regarding sexual health, asexuality, or just even knowing things. And having the freedom to ask questions that we have despite it all. Thank you so much for that. Changeling, what's your input on this?
So, the thing about I don't. Being asexual is a part of me, but it's not all of me, and it happens to be, it's one of those parts of me that doesn't come out, unless it needs to. So um, unless I'm online and I'm in one of these communities, of course. If somebody express, romantic interest or something like that, I've learned that it's just better to be upfront about, hey, I'm an asexual, so you might not get out of this what you're putting into it. And as a matter of fact, I know with me that they definitely won't. But it's one of those tricky situations where you don't want to say something that's like gets taken for how all asexuals are about relationships, but I know how it is for me, and I'm just very upfront about it. And so the answer to your question is no, I have not had a refusal of medical services based on that disclosure, because it's never happened.
Mm-hmm. And thanks for sharing that. I appreciate the courage you have to have those boundaries so easily. I know that boundaries for me, and being upfront often is a struggle. So I really do appreciate your ability to do that and the recommendations for people to just speak their truth. Thank you. And Destiny, what do you have to say about this?
So I have came out as ACE to medical professionals, just because for the longest time, like, when it came to getting a pap smear, I avoided it because I was like, what's the point? I'm not sexually active. So one day I did come out. A few times I did. And they were like, oh, well, you don't have to get it until this age then. And then once I crossed that age span thing, I let them know, hey, and they were pretty cool with it. So I haven't had any like refusal services, but they were like, we can stop when we want to. They were pretty cool with it. So I was very glad about that. So I haven't had any majorly bad experiences in that regard.
Well, I'm glad to hear that you had positive experiences. That's really comforting for people. Thank you so much for being so vulnerable. Let's go on to the next question. I think we already answered that. And the next question is, do medical providers tend to take your asexuality as a side effect of medical conditions, assume the need to be fixed, or make other assumptions? So we already talked about this a little bit, like we said. However, let's just go a little bit deep into it. Would you like to start, Changeling, please?
Okay. So I think not so much. Well, all right. So, as I've already alluded to, I've not had this conversation in a medical setting. However, I have had this conversation with other people, and the assumption does get made that the asexuality is actually because of being blind, and their assumption appears to be, well, if you can't see someone, you can't be sexually attracted to them, which I know enough blind people that I know that that is absolutely not true. And so I imagine that were that to happen in a medical setting, I would get a similar result, at least, from some people.
Yeah. And here we talk about the weird concept that people are sexually attracted to people. I mean, so the idea that somebody's seeing somebody and will become sexually attracted to them, it just floors my brain. Priya, what's your intake on this conversation?
Like I said, or just to kind of, I guess my intake on the conversation is the providers that I tend to seek out, I try to make sure that they're very like LGBT plus friendly beforehand, so that I can kind of avoid situations like that. It's that being said, if you are in like in cases where it's like a provider I'm not really sure about, maybe it's like a random healthcare provider I've never met before, as I've gotten older, I have made it a habit to not disclose my orientation, because I have had an experience where once I opened up about my orientation, there was this discussion of, oh, are you sure you don't want to go and receive a service to help you kind of find what your your whether you're attracted to the opposite gender, same gender, or both, or that sort of thing. So it's definitely I definitely know that there is this attitude in the medical field, but for the most part, it's easy to for the most part it's becoming more accepted, so that if there's any other issues I have, the my orientation, whatever issue I might be dealing with at the moment, doesn't get confused for one another. So it is getting better over time.
I appreciate that. I find that not even, but especially within mental health services, a lot of providers but a lot of providers find themselves mistakenly connecting asexuality to mental health as inherently impacting each other medically. So it's kind of like assuming that if one is asexual, then something is wrong with their brain, or like Destiny said earlier, hormonal imbalances or mental health. And it's an important and valuable discussion to have the nuances of this all. Destiny, how would you want to be a part of this conversation?
So, as listening to this, I've realized that, like, I forgot to mention that nowadays I do look for LGBT aware therapists and doctors. That's one of my criterias, which makes it kind of hard because I am on Medicare and Medicaid, but I've been somewhat lucky, although some of my other criteria isn't always met. And I'm trying to think. It has been thought of by medical and non-medical people as a side effect of my blindness and or a side effect of my low hormone levels. My best experience of it not being that assumption was my therapist. I used to have this therapist that I was with when I first discovered that I was ace, and I came in and I just like had to tell her and like my experiences, and when I told her about the whole situation and my research rabbit hole, she asked me if it was distressing me that I wasn't interested in sex, and I said no, and she accepted it. And we talked about the parts of my learning, my self-discovery journey and stuff like that. She wasn't very familiar with it, but she was open. But that's not always the case. I have received other. I just like to bring the positive into to let people know that it's sometimes it's safer not to disclose, but it doesn't always have to be that way. So, yep.
That is precious. And as you were speaking, I was thinking, Destiny, the bearer of hope. So add that to your name. Let's go to an audience question. Somebody asked, does your doctor talk to you or to your caregiver? So, Priya, would you like to give insight into this question? Either about you and your caregiver or somebody you know with a caregiver? Because I would assume we're all adult age, so I don't know if we would have caregivers.
I think, is it alright if I
Pass?
skip?
Yeah, totally.
Cool.
Yeah. Conversations are about autonomy, and autonomy means you decide when you speak. Ironically, I'm putting the name out there before, but still relevant. Changeling, how about you?
So this is being GLBTQIA aware is Destiny's criteria, and I'm sure is the criteria of a lot of people. My criteria is that the doctor talks to me. I don't have a caregiver, but I sometimes I do need help getting to appointments, and if it's a new office, sometimes I will have somebody go with me just to help me, get a layout or get a feel for how things are laid out. And so what happens is the assumption is that the person with me is my caregiver, and so they, a lot of times they will start talking to that person, whoever it happens to be. So after that first initial visit, once I feel comfortable, I don't have anybody go back with me. I just go on my own, and then they have to talk to me, whether or not they actually like it. It just sometimes you just kind of have to put them in that corner and just say, hey, it's you and me, and you need to tell me what's going on. Because I'm an adult, and I'm intelligent, and I can have these conversations.
Exactly. I like how you say even if they don't like it, because the center of this conversation is you, not them. It is you and your needs in your life, and that's what matters. Destiny, would you like to talk about this conversation too?
Yes, I don't have a caregiver in the same vein, but somewhat differently. Sometimes if it's a last minute appointment, I'll have someone take me, or I have been considering having an advocacy buddy start going with me for different reasons, unrelated to aceness. But the requirement, like they got to talk to me. The buddy is just there to help me with like my anxiety and help me. Sometimes I have trouble wording things if there's some like discrimination going on. So I most of the time don't have people with me, but I have considered bringing someone, but they wouldn't be a caregiver just because I don't have one. I do want to speak to the thing with other people who are disabled who might be physically disabled and might need either um, part-time caregiving or full-time. In those cases, a lot of times people will talk to the care provider, but it really shouldn't be that way because the person themselves needs to understand what's going on. Caregivers, I do know someone who is physically disabled, and their care provider, you know, it's come and gone. It's basically a hired part-time aide who comes in a few hours each day or every other day or whatever to help them transfer and bathe and all that. But so like there's a high turnover rate first of all. And even if it wasn't the case, not all care providers treat people that well, and the person needs to know their own stuff. So
Yeah. Very well said, Destiny. Very well said. I'm personally a caregiver. I'm off work for a bit right now, but I have a lot of feelings about this question because like caregivers are caregivers. Caregivers are not people who take away the autonomy of a human. We are supposed to add to independence in areas of autonomy for people. We're supposed to add to the empowerment of people. So doctors talking to caregivers when somebody does have like verbal capacity or somebody is able to speak for themselves, um, is a very, very harsh discrimination in my opinion. So I would hope that when it comes to asexuality and caregiving and somebody in need of medical help, they would be given the space to speak for themselves as needed and be given the central space to advocate for themselves instead of other people overstepping. And again, that's my personal perspective, and I know I say that very uh, diligently, but it's just something that I'm passionate about. So another audience question is, what do you feel health professionals, example therapists, doctors, could do to support a patient who is asexual? Priya, would you like to start this one?
Sure. First thought, I'm just educate education about what asexuality is and how it relates to the intersections of like different identities. So whether it be different mental health disorders, different disabilities, um, or any other intersectionalities as well, like how being asexual can be different for someone of a different um, um, sex, race, social standing, any of that. But especially in regards to other medical, especially in regards to how asexuality is perceived when you also have another, when you also have how asexuality is perceived when you have a medical condition is also very important. The second thing is pretty simple. I would really like to see more of the asexual spectrum being um, seen and talked about in relation to just this wider LGBT plus umbrella instead of it being kind of seen as just its own separate thing. Because once it's seen as an orientation and once it's seen as being a part of this very large supportive community, we can have healthcare providers help start,
Mm-hmm.
building trust with people in our community.
And like, quite honestly, like, healthcare providers aren't going to be able to become more proficient in those skills until they give themselves the opportunity to. Hopefully that's okay to say, but it's said, it is public, so if you have problems with me, Discord me. Destiny, what about you?
So the other thing is, even if you have the education, don't make assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
Not all asexual people are not sexually active. Some are sexually active. Not all asexual people are single, even if they're not socially active. So don't make assumptions. That's the biggest thing. If you have to know if a person is sexually active, or if a form asks that, and you're helping someone fill out a form, ask the question. I'm not afraid to say no. Like, really, I will say straight up no. But I will be honest, and for your own healthcare, it's good to be honest, and it's especially important to be believed. Some doctors, if you're not disabled, or maybe like you are, like, might be like, I don't quite believe that, and might not take it into account. So it's important for you to be honest, and for your providers to believe you.
Yeah, I mean, you can tie that up in a box and just leave. I mean, that's beautifully said. I think a lot of times our society assumes that being more inclusive means being sex positive. Being sex positive means enforcing sexuality in that way. And therefore, when people disclose experiences or orientations of asexuality, they're kind of like presented as not valid, and that's just really complicated and wrong in so many different ways. So I really do appreciate the need to be believed, heard, and validated. Changeling, how about you?
So I think really the best way to make an inclusive environment is to make sure everybody has the freedom to choose their experience. So in the case of doctors and asexuality, if I say to the doctor, "Hey, I'm asexual," um, I don't I don't necessarily want it to be. I don't want it to be assumed that I need sexual health attention, but I also don't. I don't want it to be assumed that I don't. So there's a very simple conversation that can go on there to set that up, and then the next one that the doctor sees, hopefully that person also gets the same array of options. Because sometimes, especially when you're disabled, you get somebody picks your experience, and that's the one that they've made accessible. So you don't get the range. You don't always get the range of choices. So even just by not having a choice, you're already not getting the same experience as the other people around you.
Yep, very well said. Very, very well said. And I think a part of like the solution to that could be like understanding asexuality on the spectrum, and then being able to open conversations like that about how that may impact the differences, the different nuances within the medical conversations we have with the professionals we are interacting with. Because I feel like knowing it is on a spectrum helps understanding the difference between like sexual attraction and then sexual drive and other things like that. Talking about solutions, How can we work collectively to change or transform this discrimination? What do you think, Destiny?
Educating, being willing to have these conversations when it feels safe to you can be an important part. I also feel like there needs to be more education in the medical fields about like how to handle people with disabilities, disability justice, how to handle, like different people with different sexual orientations. More of these conversations need to be had in medical care settings.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. What do you think, Priya?
I also agree on the education on like on disabilities and orientation, both within and outside the medical field. I also believe that we could potentially pass protection or rights for people with specific disabilities or orientations. I know that in a lot of places, where you may be protected from certain forms of discrimination if you are, let's say, for example, homosexual, the same wouldn't apply for any, the same protection wouldn't apply if you identified as asexual. And it's also just pushing for like having protections and rights for people with disabilities as well, while also taking into account that due to the nature of any individual disability, the there may have to be accommodations in the medical field, but like those accommodations shouldn't take away from your right to be free from discrimination either. So there's definitely things we can do in regards to education and law protections. Uh,
My apologies. There's currently like a semi-hurricane here, and been getting kind of booted off internet now enough, and now I'm on data. Um, Priya, did you finish what you were saying, or was that too distracting?
oh, I finished what I was saying.
Okay, great, thank you. And Changeling, would you like to add to the conversation, please?
Sure. So honestly, I think, and this is going to look differently for everybody, for each individual person. But honestly, the best way to solve the problem is to exist and make a solution necessary. So going back to what I said earlier about, I go into the doctor's office and I'm by myself and they have to talk to me whether or not they like it.
Mm-hmm.
So that is, that's me existing. That's, when I come in the room, so the elephant comes with me, being my physical disability, and and we have to deal with that now because here I am and I've already paid, and are you gonna, what are you gonna do? Turn me away? You can do other things later to get rid of me if you want to, but you're not going to blatantly turn me away, during that appointment time. And so even if you end up, getting turning me away later or something like that, just the fact that you got exposed to somebody who was different than you in the first place, is learning. and sometimes learning isn't always fun, and it makes people grow in ways they aren't always comfortable with. But that's the only way. That's the only way a change happens.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, it is. Indeed, it is. Well, everyone, this has been very incredible. It's been very incredible. And I want to thank each and every one of you. You have been such an important and valuable part of AceCon, and your wisdom and insight has been more than grateful. Priya, thank you so much for your dedication to the community. Thank you for speaking about your experiences and for giving thoughtful consideration to how you answer questions. Changeling, thank you for showing us how boundaries and self-confidence and self-assuration can be shown, and the importance of speaking for ourselves um, and holding on to the autonomy and the self-determination we have. And Destiny, thank you so much for being a caring soul who is very intentional about knowing that being in a space is okay and showing people how to do that to the best of their abilities. So hopefully people feel as empowered as I feel right now, and hopefully you guys also feel empowered as well. I hope you take good care, and I hope you all, both panelists and bye.
Goodbye.